Horror stalks a sleepy Welsh village when a woman is butchered in cold blood.
She had been laid out after death and mutilated.
The grisly evidence suggests a ritual sacrifice.
We were dealing with a serious murder that none of us had ever come across before.
Rumours and legends scatter police in all directions.
Who on earth could murder somebody, do a ritual, and what was the motive behind it?
Can forensic science reveal the madman behind the slaughter? This dramatic reconstruction is based on eyewitness accounts, police evidence, and court records. November 25th, 2001. Welsh police are summoned to a residence in Llanfair. First on the scene is Officer Alison Hughes.
We got the call about 12:30 from a Meals on Wheels lady who'd gone to the house and couldn't get in, so she was concerned for the safety of the lady inside. We were also told that there was a window had been smashed. As I came up to the house, straight away, there's something not right. It was big enough for somebody to get in and out of.
Mabel? Right, we're gonna have to take the blinds out.
So I removed a fair amount of the glass. So I placed all the glass in a pile to obviously preserve as much as I could. I then kind of squeezed my body through the window. See, my initial thing was I'm looking for an old lady, somebody that might be fallen. I'm looking for somebody that might be ill or injured. The room we walked into was immaculate. Nothing amiss at all, obviously apart from the broken window. The room was kind of an orange colour because of the glow from the fire.
When Hughes ventures deeper into the house, she makes a surprising discovery.
Mabel?
I can see a rug, and just at the top of the rug I can see some hair.
Hughes can't tell if the person under the blanket is sleeping, injured, or worse.
I've got hold of the top of the rug, and I've pulled it down. My initial reaction was straight away, this lady's not with us anymore. We've got to get out of here. This is a murder scene, we're out.
The widow's quiet home is soon swarming with police. Detective Dowie Jones joins those investigating the shocking crime.
On arrival there, I liaised with the officer that was in attendance.
90-year-old woman, no kids. There's a window broken round back.
We established that she was an elderly female called Mary Mabel and that she lived alone, having lost her husband.
Inspector John Clayton steps in to call the shots. Facing a Class A murder investigation in a quiet village, Clayton must quickly assemble a team from across the region.
The most important thing is you need to get your forensic team there, you need to get scene managers there, a major incident room set up. So all this takes time. Because we're working with DNA, it's so sensitive. You develop a strategy of how you're going to go in. So we're all suited and booted.
Investigators begin to document the evidence on site.
We went in and you could see the glass where the offender had thrown the slate through the lower pane.
While forensic investigators comb the scene, pathologist Brian Rogers is on hand to determine the cause of death.
We're always conscious that we don't want to go too far at a crime scene because I'm just getting and giving myself a flavour of what has happened, rather than disturb any forensic evidence.
When Rogers enters the front room, he notes a curious arrangement of objects.
I could see lying in front of the fireplace were cross pokers and candlestick, which struck me as rather odd, to say the least.
As the blanket is pulled back, the veteran pathologist is stunned by what lies beneath.
She'd clearly been mutilated. She had a large open chest wound. She had multiple stab wounds to the front and sides of her chest. One could see that the breastbone had been split down its length, virtually completely, from about this level here, down to the top of the abdomen. And without delving too deeply, it was quite obvious that the heart was missing.
For Rogers, the horror continues.
By the right-hand side of this stool, there was a silver platter which had blood in it. And sitting in that was a pan, and within that was an object wrapped up in several layers of newspaper. And I deliberately did not want to open that package there and then, for fear of destroying any forensic evidence.
Investigators suspect they know what's bundled inside.
I was thinking, I wonder is the heart in there?
Technicians continue to gather evidence, while Rogers and Clayton struggle to make sense of the bizarre scene before them.
I was thinking, this is obviously really the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life.
I was of the view that almost certainly at that time, she had been laid out after death and mutilated. For what purpose? I wasn't sure.
The doctor, when he came out, he was slightly ashen in colour. He said that this was one of the worst things that he'd seen, and he couldn't believe that somebody would have done this.
In the face of a baffling crime, investigators hope the widow's autopsy can tell the story behind her savage killing. Police are investigating a sensational homicide in the most unlikely of places.
The murder happened in a village, what we call locally as Llanfair PG, but the correct name for the village is Llanfair Pwll Gwingich, Gogerich Gwyndrobwyll, Llandiseilio Gogogoch.
And the village itself has probably got the lowest crime rate. Statistically, it is the safest place in the UK.
We were all shocked, stunned really, that something of this nature could have happened, not only in North Wales, but certainly in a rural village on Anglesey.
As forensic experts continue to pore over the scene of Mabel Lation's brutal murder, detectives are at a loss for motive. One thing is certain, it wasn't robbery.
Nothing had been taken. There wasn't a drawer open. It was strange.
Even her purse appears undisturbed. Careful analysis reveals the home to be clean of any fingerprints except the victim's. North Wales police call in forensic expert Tom Brimley.
My initial thoughts on getting involved in this investigation was potentially how difficult this crime would be to solve. Unlike perhaps a domestic murder, where it's fairly obvious, at this stage of this investigation, we'd no idea who carried out the crime, and indeed there was perhaps a real risk that another similar crime could be committed in a very short space of time.
Given the slaughter that took place, investigators find surprisingly little blood.
When you walk into a murder scene, you expect to see blood everywhere. There was none, apart from beyond the body itself.
That really caused the question, so where is the blood?
Then, a solitary smear is discovered near the back door.
This particular stain was on a sill to the side of the broad window. And it was in a position where you might anticipate somebody would put their hand on leaving the premises. Obviously, entering through a broken glass pane, there's a risk of cutting oneself.
The blood is likely to be the victim's, but police are hopeful it's the killer's. Outside, the forensic team may have hit pay dirt, a shoe print on a mossy piece of slate.
Images from the crime scene in terms of those photo marks were brought back to the laboratory, and a composite was made of those images, if you like, an artist's impression of the soul of the responsible shooter.
Inside the department's major incidents room, Clayton briefs his team on the startling details of the crime. Inspector Yestin Davis joins the investigation.
It was quite shocking for the officers at that briefing. We were all amazed, really, to hear of the graphic nature of the injuries that Mabel had sustained.
Given the slaying's ritualistic elements, police adopt a strategy to limit both panic and false confessions.
The fact that the heart had been removed, that it was a macabre murder, we wanted to keep that away from the press.
We were very concerned about the impact of releasing details would have been on the community, because the village itself had quite a large population of elderly people.
While awaiting the forensic results from the evidence found at the scene, officers hit the streets for some old-fashioned police work.
With the North Wales Police Department. I'd just like to ask you a few questions this afternoon.
Canvassing the neighbourhood, they get their first lead.
Neighbours reported seeing a blue van. One neighbour actually put the blue van at Mabel's drive.
The lead turns out to be too much of a good thing.
As soon as you release this into the media, then people are seeing blue vans everywhere. So we were getting sightings of blue vans of different sizes, shapes, different pale of blue.
As police pursue any and all tips, Dr. Rogers commences the autopsy.
When I examined the body in detail, I confirmed all the stab wounds. There were, if I recall, some 22 stab wounds. Some of these had not penetrated vital structures. Some of them were defensive injuries. So there were a lot of stab wounds to the hands and to the forearms where clearly Mrs. Lation had her arms up like this at some stage, trying to ward off blows from an assailant.
Some of the cuts on the body are more puzzling.
The wounds to the legs, to the bends of the elbows, to the neck, they were in the sites where major blood vessels would be, quite close to the skin surface. There was no obvious bleeding around them at all. They looked like typical wounds that had been inflicted after death.
With the autopsy offering more questions than answers, Rogers turns his attention to the object wrapped in newspaper. As feared, it's Mabel Lation's heart.
The heart had been removed fairly skillfully, but in a rough manner. It wasn't removed in the way a surgeon would remove the heart, or a pathologist would remove the heart, because no one would split the breastbone down the center. It's the most difficult area to go through, because it's tough, it's bone, hard bone, and it takes considerable force to cut through. So I didn't think that the assailant would necessarily have medical knowledge, but a basic knowledge of anatomy.
Mabel's heart also displays some unusual damage.
The tip of the heart was cut completely off. It seems a bizarre injury. And in my view, that had been done deliberately after the heart had been removed. As the heart is squeezed, with the tip removed, all the blood would pour out.
These injuries, coupled with the wounds near major arteries, offer only one explanation.
It was clear that after death, she had been laid out, in my view, and then mutilated, with the prime objective being of draining her body of blood.
The results of the autopsy make an already bizarre murder even stranger. Rogers' findings, when added to the crossed pokers and candlestick left at the scene, force investigators to consider the stuff of legend and nightmares.
I started researching paganism and matters of that kind just to get an insight of a potential profile of a person that would do this. The island itself is notorious from the Druids, where they had rituals.
Media attention mounts as police realize they may be dealing with some form of cult sacrifice. Investigators bring in a criminal profiler to better understand the assailant. By analyzing the case evidence and comparing it to other killings, the profiler creates a depiction of the murderer.
We were looking at potential males between 18 to 60 years of age, living alone or living with his parents. Anybody that would have had previous contact with the victim. Obviously, with the nature of the murder, it would be somebody that could be delusioned or suffering from personality disorders.
The forensic lab is also busy trying to work up its own profile.
All the bloodstains were tested. With fast-tracked DNA profiles obtained, and in each case the profile matched Mabel Lation.
Then the first hint of the killer is found, when one stain gives up a minute sample of male DNA.
We felt at this stage the trace of a male component was highly significant, given that Mabel Lation lived alone.
Now convinced the killer is a man, probably a local, and likely to strike again, Inspector Clayton orders a registry of every male in town.
We basically annexed the town off into zones, and then we just worked through it and made sure that every house was visited.
Because of the skillful way in which the heart was removed, police turned their attention to a nearby slaughterhouse. DNA samples are collected from over 400 slaughterhouse workers, a huge task with a small window of opportunity.
Some of them were migrant workers who would be travelling home, so it's important that we got our detectives in there quickly. We had to extend our investigation outside of the immediate village.
As the lab works overtime to analyze the samples, the Blue Van team finally returns with results.
We actually traced delivery van drivers who had parked close by to the house.
But soon, every single lead is ruled out. Investigators hit another wall when the shoe print found at the scene is run through a massive database with disappointing results. But lab work on the male DNA profile shows some promise, as experts are able to refine it.
The trace of male DNA found on the windowsill was further enhanced, and we obtained what we would describe as a partial DNA profile. In simple terms, a full DNA profile contained 20 pieces of information. This partial profile contained 5.
Yet the case suffers a serious blow when it's learned the profile doesn't match any of the hundreds of men tested. Then, 9 days after the murder, the investigation takes an astonishing turn when a gruesome suicide hands authorities their first suspect.
Somebody had found a body on fire down by Britannia Bridge. It was just like a wooded kind of area. You could smell burning flesh. You could smell it in the air. Very acrid, horrible smell.
Clearly, the person doused himself in fuel and had thrown himself off the bridge, which caused instant death.
Officer, has anyone been up there yet?
No, I'm going up there now.
As attendants take the body to the morgue, Hughes and her partner drive to the top of the bridge. There they find a can of petrol and something much more alarming.
There was scratchings of crosses. The Mabel Lation murder obviously had crosses, and this heightened my senses. Could this possibly be the murderer, or could this be another victim?
The deceased is soon identified as David Griffith. Investigators visit his home to learn if he could be the killer they're chasing.
Because of the bizarre nature of that sudden death, its close proximity to the scene, we felt it necessary to term him as a suspect.
The profiler takes stock of the dead man's life and becomes immediately suspicious.
gone back to live with his elderly parents, was out of work, was clearly depressed. We searched the house. There was some Welsh extracts from the Bible, and one extract made mention to a heart.
So what do you think? It fits.
Back at the major incidents room,
Gentlemen,
the profiler considers the evidence against Griffith and constructs a compelling theory.
that the man we're looking for is indeed Griffith. He has all the characteristics of our target.
The profiler was still working very closely with the investigating team.
Investigators are left to consider if Griffith killed Mabel, then stricken with guilt, offered his own life in penance.
The way that that person had killed himself, in fact he doused himself in flames, the fact that he took his own life so close to the murder scene. The profiler felt that was quite significant.
These are all central characteristics which, taken cumulatively, add up to our murderer. Our man, gentlemen, is Griffith.
Despite the profiler's insistence they've found their man, science soon begs to differ. Griffith's DNA doesn't match the blood profile recovered from the crime scene.
He was eventually eliminated from the investigation, but it took time.
With all leads going nowhere, the investigation returns to the shoe print, old evidence that now holds new promise.
From the early examination of the scene, there was fairly obvious footprints on a slate.
The foot had obviously trodden on moss. As time passed, the moss started to grow. And it was very, very fine. It developed and got better. And you can actually see it getting clearer and clearer.
Despite the good fortune of this enhanced print, there's still no match. But police won't give up.
We had to establish what kind of shoe would have left that mark. And there are hundreds of thousands of different shoes being sold every day in the UK.
Detective Jones searches nearly every shoe store in North Wales.
I must have checked literally thousands of different types of shoes, training shoes, to find this matching pattern. I was even looking at shoes when I was out socialising, asking people, can I have a quick look at you underneath your shoe?
Finally, the detective's determination pays off.
We were quite excited at this time because after painstaking days and weeks of work, we felt quite strongly that this was the pattern of a shoe that could have left the mark.
Forensic scientists confirm the match. It's a unique brand of Levi's trainer.
Fortunately, it was a shoe that was unusual in that it wasn't popular and was quickly taken out of production.
Police learned that only 52 pairs were sold in the area, 48 of them by credit card.
We could quickly narrow down the shoe.
Yes, this is Detective Dewi Harding-Jones from North Wales Police Department. Just a routine call.
By tracing credit card
I
receipts,
understand you bought
they're able
both
to
shoes,
investigate all but the handful of people who paid cash for the shoes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
But all are cleared. It's another dead end. Then the forensic lab discovers a disturbing new piece of evidence on the saucepan that contained Mabel Lation's butchered heart.
And just on one edge, there was a lip mark, like a fingerprint. You could see the lip, and so you thought, wow, this person has put the lips there.
This shocking new evidence can mean only one thing. Whoever killed and mutilated Mabel did it to drink her blood. This stunning revelation forces investigators to admit the unthinkable. North Wales police are now tracking a vampire. As Christmas approaches, The murderer of Mabel Lation remains at large. Investigators have no witnesses and no suspects. Clayton has upped police presence on the street, but the village remains gripped by fear.
The impact on the community was ever present every day. People were still not walking the dogs, people were still staying in. So it was still important to be out there, and we didn't know if this murder was going to strike again.
Only limited details about the killing have been released, but still, the truth slips out.
The police force, like any organisation, leaks information within itself very, very quickly.
As stories of the ritualistic murder spread, they grow wilder with each telling.
People were saying her intestines were drooled all over the room. Things were written on the wall. There was a lot of rumours about satanic vampires.
Authorities finally have no choice but to come clean with the public.
We wanted to allay all the misinformation and give them the information from the horse's mouth.
It was decided that we'd make an appeal via the Crime Watch programme.
First appeal is about a crime that thankfully seems to be unique. Even the FBI have never come across anything quite like it.
For the first time, police share some of the crime's most grisly details.
Crime Watch created a reconstruction, and we were asking for anybody behaving in a different manner to the norm, or anything that had become suspicious in areas like churchyards or crematoriums, those kind of places, because of this background of the ritual and the occult.
The Crime Watch show generates hundreds of calls and garners some familiar tips, like the blue van. But only one call causes excitement among detectives.
Is it? Right.
On the 19th of December, and a male person phoned us up suggesting that we look at the behaviour of a young man who lived in the village of Llanfairpwll.
The caller, an exchange student attending art college, is brought to headquarters to recount his bizarre tale.
We were told about an incident that happened back in September.
Police hear about a night that began innocently enough when 3 art students had an impromptu party. As drinking led to drugs, one in the group began to behave erratically.
He was displaying extremely strange, bizarre behaviour.
He startled the girl in the group with his strange talk.
Told her that fantasised about being a vampire.
Make me immortal. You're weird, man. I'm not weird.
The odd talk grew more and more aggressive.
Once you bite me.
He had asked her to bite him on the neck.
You're crazy.
Come on, bite me.
No.
When she refused, he attempted to force her.
Make me immortal. Come on, bite me.
Had to be physically restrained.
Panicked and confused, the girl begged police to come to her aid.
Please come quickly. This guy here is freaking out.
So in this case, this young man was arrested for what we would call a breach of the peace. He was taken to a nearby custody suite where he was lodged for the night and released without charge the following morning.
The boy was 17-year-old Matthew Hardman. Police wonder if he could possibly be the madman they're searching for.
He was slightly outside the age ranges given by the profiler, which was, of course, 18 and above. But still, this young man had to be traced, interviewed, and eliminated from the investigation.
Detectives also learn that the young artist's paintings are filled with violent and macabre images.
So we visited the college where he was an art student to see the paintings he had done.
They are struck by one particular piece of work.
Look at this.
There was a picture of an angel with an open ribcage. Although initially I didn't think a lot of them because teenagers tend to copy heavy rock LP pictures which might be like angels and motorbike riders going into hell and all that kind of thing. So that in itself was not unusual for me at that stage.
Nevertheless, detectives decide to pay Matthew Hardman a visit.
Ma'am? Would your son Matthew be at home?
Yes?
We'd just like to ask him a few questions.
On that Saturday, I first met Matthew Hardman. The house was, in effect, 100 yards as the crow flies from the scene of the murder.
So, we just have a few questions.
Sure. What can I do for you?
We were making inquiries to establish certain facts about this incident in September where he had purportedly tried to bite or ask people to bite him.
So, young man, why did you attack her?
I just got a little out of control. It was one of those nights. I did apologize to her afterwards.
He appeared quite straight-laced, willing to talk to us, and came across as a pleasant teenage boy, really.
So, did you know Mabel?
Just from the television, after she'd, died.
I'd also found out that he'd been a local paper boy. And I asked whether he'd delivered paper there. And he said, well, I haven't been a paper boy for 3 years. So I asked his mother as she came in, and his mother said he'd finished 3 months ago.
Investigators wonder if Matthew's confusion between months and years is a simple slip of the tongue, or something dark.
I did deliver papers there.
They decide to take a closer look.
Say, Matthew, I understand you.
And I asked him, would he like to show me some of his other paintings that he had in the house? I was having a gut feeling about something here.
Sure, no worries.
The teen's drawings seem innocent enough, but there's something else that catches Jones's eye.
We saw a pair of Levi shoes in his bedroom. This is the first Levi shoes we've seen.
There was a footprint outside the back of the house. Mind if I take these? Just to check the print.
And he asked us why, and we said because we had to eliminate all shoe impressions that would have been at the house. And as a result of him being a paper boy there, we wanted to eliminate those shoes out of inquiry.
I'll get them back, right?
Of course.
Jones is eager to get the boy's shoes to the lab.
I honestly felt this was a major breakthrough. The immediate thing I told my colleague is, we've got our man. And he told me, do you think so? He's only 17.
Hardman had been interviewed during the police sweep of the area, but his age and alibi kept him off the radar. Now, his story is examined more closely.
He had said that his parent was away, but that he'd been with another person on the night in question.
Detectives dig deeper and learn that Hardman's alibi witness is the same exchange student who tipped off police.
Matthew Hardman said he was with you.
That's not true.
You're certain he wasn't with you?
Absolutely.
With the teenager's alibi discredited, police are tempted to ignore the profiler's criteria. And under closer scrutiny, Hardman looks less and less like the boy next door.
We decided that we'd make sure that we kept an eye on him round the clock. And the interesting point at this stage is that he had the confidence to go out at night, walking, whereas nobody else did.
When forensics deliver their findings on Hardman's shoes, speculation turns to certainty.
The marks not only corresponded in pattern, they also corresponded in size. What this meant was that we couldn't be categorically certain that those particular shoes made the marks. There was very strong evidence to say that they did.
Based on that, the decision was made to arrest Matthew Hardman on suspicion of murder the following morning.
Police have 72 hours to interrogate the team before they have to either lay charges or release him.
Although the name of Matthew Hardman hadn't been given, within that small community, a lot of people knew and found it sort of incredulous to believe that this person could have done this.
Because of the monstrous crime, you're expecting to meet a monster. And we didn't meet a monster.
Detective Jones and Inspector Davis conduct exhaustive interviews with Hardman.
So how did your trainer print get there, son?
I told you, I don't know. I don't know how that even means anything. It's a very popular shoe.
Not really. Kind of rare, actually.
The teenager
I honestly
remains
wish
calm
I
and
could
polite
look
and
at
answers the
that.
detective's questions willingly. Having already admitted he delivered papers to Mabel Lation's house, he now concedes he sometimes spoke to the widow.
Thank you, Matthew. Late again, I see. Make sure you close the gate when you go on your way out, won't you?
Right, Miss Lation?
What do you say now?
I said I always
And
close
through their
the gate.
interactions, he learned she was hard of hearing. As the detectives continue to press Hardman, crime scene investigators search the teen's bedroom.
It was a painstaking examination.
They soon find something of interest.
It did take Sherlock Holmes to work out that that is likely to be the knife.
But the knife isn't the only thing of note.
There were magazines, books on Dracula, the devil. So we are now beginning to uncover a lot of evidence, not only from the house, but evidence that painted a picture of this young man.
When confronted with the discovery, Hardman admits his obsession.
He would tell you that what was fascinating about vampirism is that it would lead to immortality.
So I said I wanted to live forever. Who doesn't?
Huh. Most people are quite content with living to 80 years. I reckon that living forever would be a bit tiring, don't you think?
Throughout Hardman's interrogation, the investigation continues in the lab.
When Matthew Hardman was arrested, a DNA sample will be taken from him. So whilst Matthew is being interviewed by the police about his possible involvement in the crime, this DNA sample is fast-tracked through the DNA processing.
Results are in.
On the third day of interrogation, lab analysis is completed and the results are delivered.
The sample found within the blood of Mabel Lation on the sill matched component parts of Matthew Hardman's DNA profile, which is relatively low.
So, Matthew, would you care to explain how your DNA was found?
When the evidence of the DNA from the scene was put to him, his reaction was, get the scientists to check it again.
Your man's wrong. You've got your numbers mixed up.
The match may be too weak to win over a jury, but it's enough for police.
The evidence against him was mounting day by day. It was decided that there was sufficient evidence to charge him with a murder.
You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense.
Yet not everyone is convinced.
Something we should later rely on in
The feeling in the village, once the news got out that it was Matthew, was total and utter shock. You know, they thought, how? How could it possibly be him? There was a lot of disbelief. A lot of disbelief within the village that they've got it wrong.
The case now rests on circumstantial evidence and a weak DNA match. Only further testing can confirm Hardman's guilt or free him, perhaps to kill again.
partial DNA profile from the sill reflects a figure of 1 in 1,000. This figure was derived from the fact that 5 pieces of DNA out of a maximum 20 were visible. In this particular case, we did a lot more work on those sub-threshold amounts and finally revealed another 4 pieces of DNA information.
After weeks of testing, forensic science finally becomes irrefutable.
Which is effectively to change the figure from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 73 million.
It was just fantastic news, basically, because when you know you've got the right person, the last thing you want is that person to walk out the door. The importance of science at that point was to get to the stage where we could prove it beyond any doubt whatsoever.
On the heels of this breakthrough, the lab makes yet another discovery.
The knife would initially be examined at the laboratory using a microscope. Even with a microscope, no visible blood was observed. But where the handle joined the blade, there was a trace, and we actually took a swab from that area.
Scientists develop a profile from the blood, with damning results.
Not only did they have Matthew Hardman's DNA upon that knife, but in the hilt of the knife was Mabel Leishon's DNA profile.
If we consider the total forensic evidence in this case, that is, the DNA on the windowsill that matches Matthew Hardman, the DNA on the knife that was recovered from Matthew that matches Mabel Leishon, and also the shoes that Matthew was wearing that matches marks at the scene, and in simple terms, the evidence would appear to be overwhelming.
In a bizarre twist of fate, Hardman is betrayed by evidence culled from the very blood he craved. Now, the world will learn what really happened on that horrible November night in 2001. In a small courtroom in northern Wales, the dreadful story of Mabel Leishon's murder is laid out for judge and jury.
I have no doubt that Matthew planned this.
The prosecution claims Hardman targeted Mabel because he knew she lived alone and had no relatives. He waited until his family went away for the weekend, then crept the short distance to the widow's home, armed with a weapon and deranged intent.
This was the opportunity that Matthew Hardman had been waiting for. He was aware that it was unlikely that Mabel Leishon would have heard that window being smashed. It's my firm opinion that Matthew Hardman, wanting to live out this fantasy of being a vampire, he made his way into the lounge where he found Mabel Leishon alone and carried out the frenzied attack.
Although Mabel fought back, her efforts were in vain.
Thereafter, Matthew Hardman carried out post-mortem activity on the body.
He lifted the sacrificed corpse, placed it in a chair, and commenced his methodical ritual.
He's laid a cross on the floor of the house.
He opened the sternum,
removed her heart, drained the blood out of the body into the saucepan. At one point, I believe that he's held the heart in his hand, where there are drip marks on the floor.
When the saucepan was full, Hardman took what he believed was the final step toward immortality.
drank her blood and challenged the cross to see whether it affected him as a vampire. And I think he's realised that it hasn't. I'm still the same.
He lost his father when he was fairly young, and I think that had some bearing on the way Matthew Hardman subsequently grew as a person. That was quite an upheaval for him, I think, and that may have been a root cause for him wishing this immortality.
No, sir. I'd never been inside the house, nor have I been around back.
During the trial, Matthew was very quiet, very composed. But there was just something about him that wasn't right. Very, very cold eyes. Just looking at him, there was something strange about him.
The evidence is overwhelming. In August of 2002, Matthew Hardman is found guilty of the murder of Mabel Lation and sentenced to life in prison. But Lation wasn't his only victim. The place they both called home will never be the same.
The residue of what happened, I don't think that'll ever go away.
Despite the volume of forensic evidence against him, Hardman never confesses.
The last thing I told him in the interview was, Matthew, you've got a lot of things in your head that need to come out, and you need to tell somebody about them. I now, from the evidence, believe that she was killed as part of his obsession with vampirism, but the only person that can actually tell us that is Matthew.